Commander Vexera's claws scraped against the metal floor as she paced before the human prisoner. The detention bay's harsh lighting cast jagged shadows across her reptilian features, emphasizing the predatory gleam in her golden eyes. She had conquered 17 worlds, broken the spirits of countless species, and now stood before what the galaxy considered the most dangerous creature alive, a human. "Kneel," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. Marcus Kane remained standing, his arms crossed casually behind his back. The neural dampeners should have made him compliant, submissive. Instead, he smiled an expression that made Vexthera's scales prickle with unease. Marcus said conversationally, "I've been studying your species for the past 3 months. Fascinating culture. It's built entirely on dominance hierarchies. Your whole civilization collapses if someone doesn't submit when ordered." Vexthera's tail lashed. "The neural dampeners don't work on humans the way you think they do." Marcus took a step forward, and despite herself, Vexthera took one back. "See, you make the same mistake every species makes. You think breaking our minds will break our spirit, but humans are wired differently." The commander's hand moved to her plasma weapon. "You will submit, or I will make you submit." "What?" "Will you?" Marcus tilted his head. "Because I've been watching you, Vexera. 3 months of psychological observation. You're not just a conqueror, you're desperate. Your entire self-worth depends on others kneeling. But what happens when someone doesn't? What happens when your fundamental worldview cracks?" Vexthera's breathing quickened. This wasn't how interrogations went. Prisoners begged. They pleaded. They didn't analyze their captors with clinical precision. "Your species evolved on a world where submission meant survival," Marcus continued, his voice gentle but relentless. "But humans evolved on a world where defiance meant evolution. We don't break, we adapt. We don't submit, we overcome." Plasma weapon trembled in Vexthera's grip. "I am Commander Vexthera of the Hegemony. I have crushed civilizations." "You're afraid?" Marcus interrupted. "Afraid that if just one being refuses to kneel, your entire identity becomes meaningless. That's why you needed to capture me personally, not for information, not for strategic advantage. You needed to prove that even humans could be broken." Vexthera's golden eyes widened. He was right. Every word struck like a physical blow. "But here's the thing about humans," Marcus said, taking another step forward. "We don't just resist. We turn the tables. Make our captors question everything they believe about power, about control, about themselves." The plasma weapon clattered to the floor. Vexthera's legs felt weak, her carefully constructed certainty crumbling. "So I'll ask you again," Marcus said softly. "Who's really in control here?" For the first time in her life, Commander Vexthera felt something she'd never experienced. Doubt. And with that doubt came something far more dangerous, the first crack. In her absolute authority, Vexthera stared at the fallen weapon, her mind reeling. In 47 years of existence, she had never dropped a weapon, never hesitated, never felt the cold grip of uncertainty that now squeezed her chest like a vice. "Pick it up," Marcus said quietly. The command sent a shock through her system. She was the one who gave orders, not the one who received them. Yet her hand moved involuntarily toward the plasma weapon before she caught herself. "Interesting," Marcus observed. "Your species responds to authority regardless of the source. It's hardwired into your neural patterns. But there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Vexthera's tail coiled around her legs, a defensive posture she hadn't adopted since childhood. "You're attempting psychological manipulation. I'm revealing truth." Marcus settled into a relaxed stance.
"Ow."
"Your entire empire is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of power. You think it comes from making others kneel. But real power, real control, that comes from understanding what makes someone want to kneel in the first place." The words hit like precision strikes. Her victories had been built on fear, on overwhelming force, on the assumption that all beings shared her species' instinct for hierarchical order. "Your hands are shaking," Marcus noted. Vexthera looked down, horrified to see he was right. The tremors had started without her notice, spreading from her fingers up her arms. physical manifestations of psychological disruptions, something that happened to other species, not to her. "This is impossible," she whispered. "No, it's inevitable. You've built your entire sense of self on being the apex predator. But what happens when you encounter something that doesn't recognize predator and prey? What happens when you meet something that sees you as just another being with fears and insecurities?" Marcus moved closer, not threatening but somehow more unsettling because of his calm. "Your species has a saying, the strong command, the weak obey. But humans have a different philosophy. The wise understand, the foolish assume. I am not weak." Vexera's voice cracked on the last word. "No, you're not weak. You're scared, and that's okay. Fear is what happens when we realize our understanding of the world is incomplete. The question is, what do you do with that fear?" Vexera's breathing became labored. Every word from this human stripped away another layer of her carefully constructed identity. She was Commander Vexera, conqueror of worlds, breaker of spirits. She was not someone who experienced fear. "You're wondering how I know so much about your psychology," Marcus continued. 3 months of observation, but more than that, humans are natural psychologists. We had to be. We evolved in groups where understanding each other's motivations meant survival. We learned to read fear, anger, desire, hope. We learned to find the cracks in any facade. "What do you want?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Marcus smiled, and for the first time it wasn't predatory. It was almost understanding. "I want you to realize that kneeling isn't about submission. It's about choice. And right now, you're choosing to let fear control you instead of confronting it." Vexera's legs began to buckle. The psychological pressure was unlike anything she'd experienced. Worse than physical pain, worse than the threat of death. This was the dissolution of everything she thought she knew about herself. "Don't fight it," Marcus said gently. "Let it happen." Vexera's knees hit the cold metal floor with a sound that echoed through the detention bay like a gunshot.
Ow.
The physical impact was nothing compared to the psychological earthquake that followed. She Commander Vexera, scourge of the Outer Rim, was kneeling before a human prisoner. "No," she breathed, trying to force herself back to her feet. Her legs wouldn't respond. "This isn't possible." Marcus knelt as well, bringing himself to her eye level. The gesture was so unexpected that Vexera's head snapped up, confusion replacing horror. "Power isn't about making others kneel," he said softly. "It's about choosing when to kneel yourself. Right now, you're not submitting to me. You're submitting to truth. Truth." Vexera's voice was barely a whisper. "What truth?" "That your entire empire is built on beings who kneel because they're afraid, not because they respect you. You've never actually won a single battle. You've just encountered species that chose surrender over extinction. That you've never faced a species that sees kneeling as a tactical choice rather than defeat." Each word was a surgical strike against her worldview. Vexera's claws scraped against the floor as she tried to process concepts that shouldn't exist in her universe. "The hegemony has conquered 17 worlds," she protested weakly. "The hegemony has accepted the surrender of 17 worlds," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. Conquest implies resistance. What you've done is harvested fear." Vexera, golden eyes filled with something she'd never experienced, stares. Right. On her world, tears were a sign of ultimate weakness, a biological response reserved for the dying. Yet here she was, crying in front of an enemy. "I don't understand," she admitted. "No. Don't understand because you've never needed to. Your species evolved on a world where strength was binary. You were either dominant or you were food. But humans evolved on a world where intelligence was survival. We learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is appear weak. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to kneel." Marcus reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement. When Vexera didn't flinch, he gently touched her shoulder. The contact sent a shock through her system, not painful, but profound. "When was the last time someone had touched her without fear or subservience?" "Your empire is crumbling," he said. "Not from external threats, but from internal contradictions. You can't build a sustainable civilization on fear alone. Eventually, the fear fades, and then what do you have left? Xthera's mind raced through the intelligence reports she'd been ignoring. Rebellions on 3 worlds, decreased productivity on 7 more, strategic resources being diverted to maintain order. Rather than expansion, she'd dismissed these as temporary setbacks, but now, you're saying we're doomed. I'm saying you're at a crossroads. You can continue down the path of fear and watch your empire collapse within a generation. Or you can learn what humans figured out 50,000 years ago. True strength comes from unity, not domination. Tears fell freely now, carving silver tracks down her scaled cheeks. But if I'm not a conqueror, what am I? You're Vexthera, Marcus said simply. Not Commander Vexthera. Not the Scourge of the Outer Rim. Not any of the titles that define. You buy what you've done to others? You're just Vexthera, and maybe that's enough. For the first time in her adult life, Vexthera felt something other than the crushing weight of authority. She felt possibility. I don't know how to be anything else, she whispered. Then learn, Marcus said. Humans have a saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Vexthera remained on her knees, but her posture had shifted. No longer the collapse of defeat, but the deliberate positioning of someone choosing to listen. Marcus recognized the change immediately, the subtle difference between submission and attention. Your security forces are wondering why this interrogation is taking so long, he observed. Vexthera's eyes widened. She'd completely lost track of time, of protocol, of everything except the conversation that was systematically dismantling her understanding of existence. They'll come looking, she said. Will they? Or will they wait for you to emerge victorious as you always do? Marcus stood and walked to the detention bay's single window. Your subordinates are as trapped by your mythology as you are. They can't conceive of a scenario where Commander Vexthera doesn't emerge in complete control. The observation struck home. Vexthera had cultivated an aura of invincibility so complete that her own officers were afraid to interrupt her, even when logic suggested they should. But what happens when that mythology cracks? Marcus continued. What happens when they see you as you really are not a force of nature, but a being capable of doubt, fear, and growth? They'll lose respect, Vexthera said automatically. Will they, or will they finally be able to relate to you as something other than a source of terror? Vexthera tried to imagine her officers seeing her as anything other than the supreme authority. The concept was so foreign it made her head spin. Her entire career had been built on maintaining distance, on being more than mere flesh and blood. Seen your personnel files? Marcus said casually. Subnote 7 about Lieutenant Kexmore. Subnote 12 about Captain Thelovin. Subnote 19 about... How do you know about the subnotes? Vexthera interrupted, shocked. Because I've been studying your empire for 3 months. Every report, every communication, every personal log. Your officers don't just fear you there, desperate for your approval. They write these little personal observations in their reports, hoping you'll see them as more than just functional units. The subnotes. Vexthera had always skipped past them, considering them irrelevant additions. 2 tactical reports. Now Marcus was telling her they were attempts at connection. Lieutenant Kexmore mentions his daughter's graduation in subnote. 7. Captain Thelovin writes about her concerns over the morale decrease in subnote. They're not just reporting facts, they're trying to communicate with you as a person. Vexthera's claws clenched. I don't have time for personal details. You don't have time for the very connections that hold your empire together? Marcus turned from the window. Every great human leader understood that armies don't fight for causes, they fight for each other. Your officers aren't loyal to the hegemony. They're loyal to you. But they're loyal to an idea of you that you've never allowed to actually exist. The words hit like a physical blow. Vexthera had spent so much energy maintaining her image as the untouchable commander that she'd never considered the cost. She'd surrounded herself with beings who feared her rather than beings who knew her. You're saying I'm alone? Saying you've chosen to be alone? There's a difference. Marcus approached slowly, but it's not too late to choose differently. Vexthera looked up at him, and for the first time, she wasn't seeing a prisoner or an enemy. She was seeing someone who understood isolation, who had somehow learned to bridge the gap between strength and connection. How? She asked. By doing the hardest thing you've ever done, Marcus said. By being vulnerable. Yes. By admitting that you don't have all the answers. By allowing others to see you as more than just a symbol of power. The suggestion was terrifying. Vulnerability had been bred out of her species as a survival mechanism. But here was a human, supposedly the most dangerous creature in the galaxy, advocating for it as a form of strength? What if they betray me? What if they don't? Vexthera rose slowly from her knees, not in defeat, but in deliberation. Her legs were steady now, her breathing controlled. The panic had passed, replaced by something far more dangerous to her old worldview curiosity. You're asking me to abandon everything I've built, she said. I'm asking you to build something better, Marcus replied. Your empire is impressive, but it's also fragile. Take away the fear, and what's left? Take away your personal presence, and does the hegemony survive? The question cut deep because Vexthera knew the answer. Her empire was built around her, dependent on her continued dominance. Without her, it would fragment within cycles. Human empires have lasted millennia, Marcus continued. Not because they were built on fear, but because they were built on shared values, mutual benefit, and the understanding that strength comes from unity, not domination. But humans are weak individually, Vexthera protested. Your species requires cooperation because you can't survive alone. Exactly, Marcus smiled. We learned that survival wasn't about being the strongest individual, it was about creating the strongest group. Your species never learned that lesson because you never had to. You were apex predators from the beginning, Vexthera paced her, mind working through the implications. You're saying our strength is our weakness? I'm saying your strength has an expiration date. What happens when you encounter a species that doesn't fear you? What happens when you face beings who see individual dominance as primitive rather than impressive? The questions were academic until 3 months ago, and humanity had joined the galactic community, and everything had changed. Humans didn't cower before the hegemony. They didn't submit to superior firepower. They adapted, learned, and worst of all, they remained completely unimpressed by displays of dominance. Your species sees us as an anomaly, Vexthera said. No. We see you as an adolescent civilization, impressive in your way, but ultimately limited by your own assumptions about how power works. The characterization should have been insulting. Instead, it felt like a diagnosis. Vexthera had always assumed that her species' approach to power was the only viable one. The possibility that it was simply one option among many was revolutionary. What would you do? She asked. If you were in my position? Marcus considered the question carefully. I'd start by admitting that I don't have all the answers. Then I'd ask my officers what they think. Not what they think I want to hear, but what they actually think about the challenges facing the hegemony. You tell me what they think I want to hear anyway. Not if you create an environment where honesty is valued over compliance. Not if you demonstrate that vulnerability is acceptable by being vulnerable yourself. Vexthera tried to imagine such a conversation. Captain Thelevan, expressing her actual concerns about morale. Lieutenant Kexmore, discussing his daughters. Future in a galaxy where the hegemony might not exist. Officers treating her as a leader rather than a symbol. It would be chaos, she said. It would be growth, Marcus corrected. Chaos is what happens when a rigid system encounters forces it can't control. Growth is what happens when a flexible system adapts to new circumstances. The detention bay's door chimed. Someone was requesting entry. Vexthera looked at the door, then at Marcus, then back at the door. This was the moment of choice. Could end this conversation, return to her old patterns, and maintain the status quo. Or she could take the first step towards something unknown. Commander? The voice belonged to Captain Thelevan. Vexthera looked at Marcus one last time. He nodded slightly, not in encouragement, but in understanding. Whatever happened next was her choice. Enter, she called. The door slid open, revealing Captain Thelavan and 2 security officers. They stopped short when they saw their commander. Standing casually with the prisoner, no weapons drawn, no signs of interrogation, Captain BlackHFY said, her voice steady but different somehow. I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me your honest opinion, not what you think I want to hear. Captain Thelavan's scales shifted from deep blue to lighter azure, a sign of confusion among her species. 17 years of service, she had never been asked for her honest opinion about anything. Orders were given, reports were filed, and personal thoughts were kept carefully hidden. Commander, she ventured, the prisoner has raised some interesting points about the sustainability of our current approach, BlackHFY said, her tone conversational rather than commanding. I'd like to hear your assessment of morale and loyalty throughout the fleet. The 2 security officers exchanged glances. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't how Commander BlackHFY operated. She didn't ask for assessments. She demanded results. My honest assessment? Captain Thelavan asked carefully. Your completely honest assessment, BlackHFY confirmed. No political considerations, no concerns about my reaction. It's just your professional evaluation. Marcus remained silent, watching the dynamic shift in real time. This was the critical moment. Would years of fear-based hierarchy collapse, or would it evolve into something more sustainable? Captain Thelavan's posture straightened. Morale is deteriorating across 7 systems. The rebellions aren't random, they're coordinated. Our intelligence suggests that resistance networks are sharing information about our tactical patterns. But more concerning is the attitude change among our own forces, explained BlackHFY said, and her voice carried genuine interest rather than implied threat. The younger officers question our methods, not openly, but in private communications we've intercepted. They're asking whether fear-based control is actually effective long-term. Some are even requesting transfers to diplomatic corps rather than military commands. The words would have been treason 6 months ago. Today they were information. In your opinion of these concerns? BlackHFY pressed. Captain Thelavan glanced at the security officers, then at Marcus, then back at her. Commander, I think they're valid. We're spending more resources maintaining control than we are expanding or improving our territories. The fear that once made us strong is now making us brittle. The security officers' scale shifted to warning colors. They were witnessing either the beginning of a revolution or the most elaborate trap in military history. Lieutenant Kexmore, BlackHFY, addressed one of the security officers directly. In your report about the patrol incident near the Kepler station, you mentioned concerns about civilian casualties. Elaborate. Lieutenant Kexmore's voice was barely above a whisper. The civilian casualties were ... unnecessary. We could have achieved the same tactical objective with minimal loss of life. But protocol dictated maximum intimidation. And you believe maximum intimidation is counterproductive? I believe it's creating more enemies than it's eliminating, Commander. Marcus watched the transformation with fascination. These weren't revelations, they were admissions of thoughts that had been suppressed for years. BlackHFY hadn't just been ruling through fear. She'd been ruling in spite of her officers' better judgment. Captain Thelavan, BlackHFY said hypothetically, if we were to modify our approach to focus on cooperation rather than domination, what would that look like? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Captain Thelavan. Scales cycled through several colors before settling on a deep purple, the color of deep thought. Trade partnerships instead of resource extraction, she said slowly. Cultural exchanges instead of subjugation. Mutual defense agreements instead of occupation. Humans have demonstrated that voluntary cooperation can be more effective than forced compliance. The humans, BlackHFY repeated, looking at Marcus. What have you observed about their approach to interstellar relations? Marcus spoke for the first time since the others had entered. We prefer partners to subjects. We've found that beings who choose to work with us are more reliable than beings who are forced to work for us. And if they refuse to work with you, then we find other partners. The galaxy is vast enough for multiple approaches to civilization. The concept was so simple, it was revolutionary. Instead of forcing compliance, simply offer cooperation and accept when it was declined. Instead of building empires through conquest, Build networks through mutual benefit. Commander Lieutenant Kexmore said hesitantly. My daughter asks me why we fight beings who've never threatened us. I've never known how to answer her. Vexthera looked at the young officer with new eyes. What do you tell her? I tell her that we fight to keep her safe. But she's smart enough to ask why beings who've never heard of her would want to hurt her in the first place. The silence in the detention bay was heavy with possibility. For members of the hegemony's military leadership stood in a circle with a human prisoner, and the fundamental assumptions of their civilization hung in the balance. Your daughter is asking the right questions, Vexera said finally. Perhaps we should be asking them too. Marcus recognized the moment for what it was, the point where abstract philosophy became personal reality. These weren't just military officers reconsidering tactics. They were parents, individuals, and beings who had been carrying the weight of a system they'd never been allowed to question. I have a proposal, Vexera continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. We're going to conduct an experiment. A limited trial of diplomatic engagement with 3 systems currently under hegemony control. Captain Thalavanus' scales flickered between colors. The High Command will never approve such a deviation from established protocol. The High Command doesn't need to approve it, Vexthera replied. This is a military field exercise designed to test the effectiveness of alternative control methods. We'll present it as a tactical innovation, not a philosophical revolution. Elegance of the approach wasn't lost on Marcus. Vexthera was using the system's own rigid hierarchy to implement change from within. By framing cooperation as a military tactic rather than a moral imperative, she was making it acceptable to her superiors. What would this experiment involve? Lieutenant Kexmore asked. We withdraw a military presence from 3 systems and replace it with diplomatic stations. We offer the local populations a choice. Continued membership in the hegemony with full autonomy over internal affairs or complete independence with the option for future trade relationships. The proposal was radical beyond anything the hegemony had ever attempted. It went against every principle of their expansion strategy. And if they choose independence, Captain Thelavan asked, then we wish them well and maintain friendly relations. Vexthera said. If they choose to remain with the hegemony, we have willing partners instead of reluctant subjects. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction watching the conversation unfold. This was how civilizations evolved, not through conquest or revolution, but through the gradual recognition that old methods had reached their limits. Commander, Lieutenant Kexmore said, permission to speak freely. Granted. This is the most terrifying and exciting thing I've ever heard. My daughter asks me about the future, and for the first time in years, I think I might have an answer that doesn't involve fear. The words hit Vexthera like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire career building a legacy of strength. Never. Considering that strength might be measured differently by the next generation. Captain Thelavan, she said, you mentioned in your reports that younger officers are questioning our methods. What do they propose as alternatives? They study human diplomatic protocols. They discuss resource-sharing agreements. They wonder if conquest is necessary when cooperation might be more effective. Captain Thelavan's voice grew stronger. They're not questioning our strength, they're questioning whether we're using our strength wisely, in your opinion? I think they're right to question. I think we've been so focused on being feared that we've forgotten to be respected. Marcus watched Vexthera process this distinction. Fear was temporary, brittle, and required constant maintenance. Respect was sustainable, flexible, and grew stronger over time. Huma Vexthera said, turning to Marcus, if we were to implement this experiment, would your species be willing to serve as mediators, to help us navigate this transition? We'd be honored to help, Marcus replied. But the real work has to come from within your own civilization. Change imposed from outside isn't sustainable, it has to be chosen from within. Vexthera nodded slowly. Then we begin with ourselves. Captain Thelavan, I want you to prepare a comprehensive report on the feasibility of diplomatic engagement. Lieutenant Kexmore, I want you to analyze the resource requirements for maintaining willing cooperation versus forced compliance. And you, Commander? Captain Thelavan asked. I'm going to do something I've never done before, Vexthera said. I'm going to ask the High Command for permission to try something new. The High Command chamber was a monument to hegemony authority, passive hegemony, imposing design to make anyone who entered feel small and powerless. Vexera had stood in this chamber dozens of times, always as the conquering hero reporting another successful subjugation. Today, she stood as something entirely different, an innovator proposing change. Supreme Commander Velterax dominated the raised platform, his massive frame casting shadows across the assembled leadership. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority when he spoke. Commander Vexera, your request for this emergency session is highly irregular. Your message spoke of critical tactical innovations, but provided no details. Supreme Commander Vexera began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose. I've discovered a fundamental flaw in our expansion strategy. The words sent ripples of shock through the chamber. No one spoke of flaws in hegemony strategy. They spoke of temporary setbacks or external complications, never systematic problems. Explain, Velterax commanded. Our current approach requires exponentially increasing resources to maintain control as we expand. We're reaching a point where the cost of maintaining fear-based compliance will exceed the benefits of expansion. Vexera activated a holographic display showing resource allocation trends over the past decade. The data was stark: more ships, more personnel, more weapons required to maintain the same level of control as resistance networks became more sophisticated. Furthermore, she continued, we're encountering species that don't respond to intimidation the way our traditional targets have. The humans represent only the first of what intelligence suggests will be many such encounters. Commander Kolthak, leader of the Third Fleet, spoke up. Are you suggesting we lack the strength to overcome these challenges? I'm suggesting we're using strength inefficiently, Vexera replied. We're applying brute force to problems that might be solved more elegantly through different approaches. The chamber erupted in angry voices. The suggestion that there might be alternatives to overwhelming force was heretical to beings who had built their entire civilization on the principle that might makes right. Silence. Velterax's roar cut through the chaos. Commander Vexera, you will explain these different approaches you reference. Diplomatic engagement, Vexera said simply. Instead of forcing compliance, we offer cooperation. Instead of demanding submission, we propose partnership. Weakness, Commander Kolthak spat. You would have us negotiate with beings who should kneel before our superiority. I would have us win without fighting, Vexera replied. Humans have a saying, the supreme excellence is to subdue the enemy without fighting. What if we could achieve our expansion goals with willing partners instead of conquered subjects? She activated another display, showing projections of resource requirements under different scenarios. The cooperative model showed dramatically lower military costs and higher productivity from integrated systems. This is theoretical, Commander Yalmora pointed out. You have no proof that such an approach would work. I propose a limited trial, Vexera said. 3 systems, 6-month duration. We withdraw a military presence and replace it with diplomatic stations. We offer the local populations a choice. Continued membership in the hegemony with full autonomy over internal affairs, or complete independence with the option for future trade relationships. The proposal was met with stunned silence. In the history of the hegemony, no territory had ever been offered a choice about membership, and if they choose independence, Velterax asked, then we have demonstrated that our strength is sufficient, that we don't need to hold territories by force, can afford to be generous. The reframing was brilliant. Instead of presenting cooperation as weakness, Vexera was presenting it as a display of supreme confidence. Only the truly strong could afford to give others choices. The risk, Commander Kolthak said, is that other systems will demand similar choices. The opportunity, Vexera countered, is that other systems will see the benefits of voluntary cooperation and choose to join us rather than resist us. Supreme Commander Velterax was silent for long moments, his ancient eyes studying the data displays. Finally, he spoke. You have been our most successful field commander, Vexera. Your tactical innovations have brought 17 worlds under our control. If you believe this approach has merit, we will consider it. However, he continued, you will personally oversee this experiment. If it fails, if we lose territory or respect, the responsibility will be yours alone. I accept that responsibility, Vextera said without hesitation. Then you have permission to proceed. But remember, the hegemony's strength is our most precious asset. Do not mistake experimentation for weakness. 6 months later, Vextera stood in the same detention bay where her worldview had first begun to crack. This time, she wasn't interrogating a prisoner, she was meeting with a partner. Marcus Kane now served as an official diplomatic advisor, his insights having proven invaluable in navigating the complex transition from domination to cooperation. The preliminary results are remarkable, she said, reviewing the data displays floating between them. System productivity is up 37% across all 3 trial worlds. Resource extraction has increased despite reduced military presence. And most importantly, we've had 0 incidents of rebellion or resistance. Marcus nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. The numbers are encouraging, but the real test is sustainability. Can this approach survive contact with the larger hegemony structure? The High Command is intrigued, Vextera admitted. Supreme Commander Velterax has authorized expansion of the program to 10 additional systems. Commander Kolthak remains skeptical, but even he can't argue with the resource efficiency gains. And your officers, transformed Vextera said without hesitation. Captain Thelevan has become our most effective diplomatic coordinator. Lieutenant Kexmore's daughter now tells her classmates that her father helps build bridges between worlds. The change in morale throughout the fleet has been extraordinary. Marcus walked to the window, gazing out at the stars. Change is never easy, especially for a civilization that's been successful with traditional methods. But you've accomplished something remarkable. You evolved your understanding of power without losing your essential strength. I've learned that true strength isn't about making others kneel, Vextera said, joining him at the window. It's about inspiring others to stand beside you by choice. The ripple effects are already spreading beyond your experiment, Marcus observed. 3 other galactic powers have approached human diplomatic corps requesting similar advisory relationships. Your transformation is becoming a template for peaceful expansion. Vextera felt a pride different from any she'd experienced through conquest. This wasn't the satisfaction of defeating enemies, it was the deeper fulfillment of building something sustainable, something that could outlast her personal presence. There's something else, she said. The younger officers who were questioning our methods 6 months ago, they're now leading the diplomatic initiatives. They're not just implementing orders, they're innovating solutions I never would have considered. Because you gave them permission to think rather than just obey, Marcus replied. That's perhaps the most revolutionary change of all. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Vextera activated the display, revealing Captain Thelevan's excited face. Commander, we've received formal requests from 5 independent systems asking about voluntary integration into the hegemony. They've observed our diplomatic approach and want to explore partnership opportunities. Vextera's eyes widened. 5 systems are asking to join us, without any military pressure whatsoever? They're impressed by our resource-sharing agreements and conflict resolution protocols. They want to be part of what we're building. After the communication ended, Vextera stood in amazed silence. 6 months ago, expansion had required overwhelming force and constant vigilance. Now, systems were volunteering to join their alliance. This is what sustainable power looks like, Marcus said softly. Not the power to force compliance, but the power to inspire voluntary cooperation. I almost destroyed this opportunity. Vextera reflected. If I had continued down the path of pure domination, we would have eventually collapsed under the weight of our own rigidity. But you didn't. You chose growth over stagnation, adaptation over tradition. That choice has transformed not just your career, but your entire civilization's trajectory. The door chimed again, and Lieutenant Kexmore entered with a datapad. Commander, the quarterly efficiency reports from all participating systems. The results exceed every projection we made. As Vextera reviewed the data, she realized something profound had occurred. The hegemony was no longer just an empire. It was becoming a genuine alliance of worlds choosing to work together for mutual benefit. Lieutenant, she said, how would you explain our success to your daughter? Kexmore smiled an expression that had become common among her officers. I'd tell her that we learned the difference between being feared and being respected. That we discovered strength isn't about making others kneel, but about helping them stand taller. And what would she say to that? She'd probably ask why it took us so long to figure it out. The simple wisdom of the observation struck all three of them. Sometimes the most profound truths were the most obvious ones. Once you had the courage to see them, 1 year after the conversation that changed everything, Vexera stood before the Galactic Council not as a conqueror, but as a representative of the Hegemony Alliance. The name change had been symbolic, but important, reflecting the transformation from empire to confederation. The results speak for themselves. She addressed the assembled delegates. 23 systems now participate in our alliance voluntarily. Resource production has increased by 60%. Conflict resolution has improved by 80%. And most importantly, we've achieved all of this without firing a single shot in anger. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had become more powerful by choosing not to use her power. The Hegemony Alliance commanded more respect, more resources, and more influence than the old empire had ever achieved through force. Ambassador Crane of the Terran Federation spoke from the human delegation section. The transformation of the hegemony represents a new model for interstellar relations. What began as a military innovation has become a diplomatic revolution. Vexera nodded to Marcus, who sat in the advisory section. Their working relationship had evolved into something unprecedented, a partnership between former enemies that had become the foundation for a new approach to galactic politics. The question before us today, she continued, is whether this model can be scaled beyond individual alliances. Can we create a galactic community based on voluntary cooperation rather than competitive domination? The proposal was ambitious. Beyond anything previously attempted, instead of the traditional system of competing empires, Vexera was suggesting a network of voluntary alliances sharing resources, knowledge, and security responsibilities. The Hegemony Alliance pledges to share our diplomatic protocols, our conflict resolution methods, and our resource-sharing agreements with any civilization that wishes to implement them, she declared. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some delegates were intrigued by the possibilities. Others worried about the implications of such radical change. But none could argue with the results the Hegemony Alliance had achieved. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, Vexera reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the commander who demanded kneeling to the leader who inspired standing, transformation had been complete. Marcus joined her on the observation deck, both of them gazing out at the stars that no longer represented territories to be conquered, but communities to be built. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The certainty of the old way?" "I miss the simplicity," Vexera admitted. "Fear is straightforward. Respect is complex. But I wouldn't go back. The old way was dying even before I realized it. We just accelerated the inevitable. And now we're building something that can outlast us, something that grows stronger through cooperation rather than weaker through resistance." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Vexera activated the display, revealing the face of a young officer she didn't recognize. "Commander Vexera, this is Captain Morthick of the 7th Fleet. I wanted to inform you that my crew has voted to rename our vessel the Cooperation's Edge. In honor of your diplomatic innovations." The message was followed by dozens of similar communications from throughout the Alliance fleet. Ships, stations, and entire systems were adopting names that reflected the new philosophy of voluntary cooperation. "They're not just following orders anymore," Vexera observed. "They're choosing to participate in something they believe in." "That's the difference between subjects and citizens," Marcus replied. "Subjects obey. Citizens contribute." Messages continued to arrive. Vexera realized that the transformation was complete. The Hegemony Alliance had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a power structure that grew stronger by giving others the freedom to choose their own destiny. "You know what the most remarkable part is?" she said to Marcus. "What's that? A year ago, I thought power meant making others kneel. I understand that real power is inspiring others to stand. And the strangest part is that I feel more powerful than ever." 'Cause you are more powerful than ever, Marcus replied. You've discovered the secret that humanity learned long ago. True strength comes not from what you can force others to do, but from what you can inspire them to choose. Vexeta smiled, an expression that had become natural over the past year. I ordered you to kneel and you refused. Instead, you showed me how to help others stand. That refusal changed everything.
Oh. Marcus
corrected gently. Your willingness to listen changed everything. I just provided the perspective. The courage to transform was entirely yours. As they stood together looking out at the stars, Vexera felt the deep satisfaction of a leader who had not just built an empire, but had evolved one. The Hegemony Alliance would outlast her, grow beyond her, and continue to inspire voluntary cooperation long after she was gone. The galaxy was still vast, still full of challenges and opportunities. But now, it was also full of possibilities that had never existed before: the possibility of strength through unity, power through cooperation, and expansion through invitation rather than conquest. She had learned the most important lesson of leadership. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from forcing others to submit, but from inspiring them to freely choose to stand beside you. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning.